The Mafia boss noticed the Black Maid flinch at thunder, until the mansion blackout forced them closer. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Sebastian Hale. The storm had rolled in without warning, sweeping across the Hale estate like a dark curtain pulled over the sky. A single crack of thunder split the evening calm, sharp and sudden, illuminating the marble hallway in a flash of white. In that brief strike of light, Sebastian saw it. Alana Brooks flinching so hard the feather duster slipped from her hand and brushed the floor with a soft, defeated whisper. She froze, shoulders tight, breath caught in her throat as if the sound itself had reached into some distant memory she wished she could forget. And though the other staff hurried past with nervous chatter about the weather, Sebastian's gaze stayed fixed on her. He'd seen fear before, real fear, the kind that lived in a person's bones, but never wrapped in such gentleness. Alana straightened quickly, smoothing her apron, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But her fingers still trembled, and Sebastian, leaning against the banister above, noticed every detail. Another rumble rolled across the sky, deeper this time, vibrating through the old mansion's wooden beams. Alana's knees bent instinctively, a subtle brace for impact, the kind a person develops only after years of enduring storms they never chose. She whispered something to herself, maybe a prayer or a reminder to stay calm, but the words dissolved into the storm's growl. The hallway lights flickered, just once, just enough to make her eyes widen. Sebastian watched her swallow hard, watched her try to gather fragments of composure the way someone might sweep broken glass. Carefully, quietly, hoping no one would step on the pieces. He didn't move. Not yet. But his expression shifted, the cool detachment he wore like armor giving way to something else, recognition, maybe, or an understanding he did not expect to feel toward a woman he barely knew. Alana bent down to retrieve the fallen duster, but her hand hovered just above it as another thunderclap punched through the air. This time she gasped, soft but sharp, her shoulders curling inward like a shelter she built for herself. Sebastian exhaled slowly through his nose. It wasn't impatience. It wasn't annoyance. It was something closer to concern, unfamiliar and unwelcome in a man who preferred his world predictable, controlled, untouched by fragile things like trembling hands or memories triggered by storms. The lights buzzed overhead again, this time longer, wavering as if the entire grid strained against the wind. Alana's eyes darted upward. She whispered, "Please not tonight, please," her voice nearly lost beneath the thunder. Sebastian straightened. Something in that plea, quiet, private, not meant for him, lodged itself under his ribs. And in the dimming glow of the chandelier, he realized he was watching not just a maid startled by weather, but a woman bracing for a storm that had lived inside her long before this one ever reached the mansion walls. The storm pressed harder against the Hale estate, as if the wind itself was testing the strength of the old mansion. The lights steadied for a moment, humming faintly, and Alana exhaled as though that single breath could hold the building together. She reached again for the fallen duster, fingertips brushing the handle, trying to pretend her heartbeat was not rising and falling in sharp, uneven waves. She had worked in large houses before, but none felt as intimidating as this one, with its polished stone floors that echoed every footstep and its towering ceilings that made a person feel small even on calm days. Tonight, with the storm crawling over the roof, the mansion felt alive, listening, waiting. From the second-floor landing, Sebastian watched her gather herself with the quiet determination of someone who had learned to rebuild composure from the smallest pieces. She tucked the duster under her arm, smoothing her apron once more. Her chin lifted slightly, not in challenge, but in the soft, weary resolve of a woman who had practiced the art of appearing fine. Sebastian recognized that look. He had seen it on strangers in crowded rooms, on employees determined to endure long nights, on himself in the mirror after too many sleepless hours. A resilience that spoke without words. Thunder murmured in the distance again, rolling low across the valley. Alana's steps faltered for the briefest second, barely noticeable unless someone was watching closely. Someone like Sebastian. He shifted his weight but remained silent, his hand resting loosely on the railing. He was not accustomed to observing the staff so carefully, but there was something about the way Alana tried to steady herself that drew his focus again and again, as if the storm had peeled back a curtain he had not expected to look behind. Alana moved toward the side hallway, hoping the tighter space would feel less exposed. The chandeliers above swayed subtly, their crystals chiming together in soft, delicate taps that blended with the wind. She paused near a window as another flash illuminated the sky, turning the landscape outside into a silver-blue silhouette. Her breath caught, but she forced herself not to look away. She whispered, "It is only noise," the way a person might try to convince a frightened child. Yet her hands curled slightly at her sides, as if bracing for something louder, something heavier, something from a night long past. Sebastian stepped down one stair, then another, each footfall measured, unhurried. He did not approach her directly. Instead, he paused halfway down, his gaze following the slow rise and fall of her shoulders as she gathered the last bits of calm. She did not notice him yet. Her focus was turned inward, pulled toward a memory that tightened the air around her in a way even the storm could not. The mansion groaned as the wind pushed against its old beams again. The lights flickered once more, dimming for a longer stretch this time. Alana's eyes lifted slowly, not toward the storm, but toward the ceiling, toward the trembling bulbs. The hush that followed was heavy, the kind of quiet that stretched thin over the fear she fought so hard to hide. Sebastian's jaw tensed slightly, not from frustration, but from the strange urge to step in, to anchor something he could not yet name. The storm was not finished, and neither, it seemed, was the night. The lights flickered again, softer this time, as if the storm was catching its breath before striking once more. Alana stood perfectly still near the window, her posture tense, her hands pressed lightly against her apron as though grounding herself with the familiar texture of the fabric. Outside, the rain stretched across the dark lawn in sweeping sheets, blurring the garden, the stone path, and the distant tree line until everything looked like one trembling watercolor. Sebastian descended another step, the polished wood barely creaking beneath his weight. His eyes never left her silhouette, slim and motionless against the window's faint reflection. The chandelier above dimmed to a warm amber glow, and in that half-light he noticed something he had missed before. The way her shoulders subtly rose and fell in uneven rhythm, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she thought no one was looking, the way she tried to fold her fear into silence. A low rumble echoed across the sky. It was not loud, not sharp, but it carried a vibration that kissed the windows and shuddered through the hall. Alana's fingers curled, just a little. She blinked rapidly, as if chasing away an image only she could see. Watching her, Sebastian felt something unfamiliar settle beneath his stern composure. It was not sympathy exactly, but a quiet recognition, a memory of times when sound had pierced through his own calm in ways he never admitted to anyone. Alana stepped back from the window, gently, carefully, as if retreating from an invisible line. She turned toward the corridor, intending to resume her tasks, but the lights overhead dimmed again, longer this time. She paused beneath the chandelier, glancing up with a hesitant breath. The faint hum of electricity stretched thin, barely holding. She whispered, "Please stay on," and though the words were directed at the lights, they landed softly in the space between her and Sebastian. She did not know he was watching. She did not know how closely he was listening. The storm cracked again in the distance, a sound like heavy stones rolling across the sky. Not sharp, not abrupt, but deep enough to ripple through the hall. Alana flinched, a small involuntary jolt she tried to swallow immediately afterward. Her hand lifted to her collarbone, resting there as she steadied her breath. The gesture was gentle, almost graceful, but it carried a sorrowful weight, the weight of someone who had learned to hide her reactions within delicate movements. Sebastian stepped off the final stair and onto the main floor. He did not approach her directly. Instead, he stopped a few paces away, close enough that the air shifted but far enough not to startle her. She still had not noticed him, so focused on remaining composed that the world around her faded to the edges. The chandelier flickered once more, then steadied, then dimmed again. Alana exhaled shakily. The hall felt suspended, like the entire mansion was holding its breath, waiting for what the storm would do next. Sebastian watched her in the wavering light, the soft glow outlining the careful posture she fought to maintain, and he understood that the night was far from reaching its turning point. Another low rumble crept across the sky, deeper than the ones before, as if the storm had settled directly above the mansion. The lights trembled with it, dimming to a thin amber glow that stretched long shadows across the polished floor. Alana froze beneath the chandelier, her breath catching in her throat. She held perfectly still for a moment, as if any movement might invite the next crash of thunder. Sebastian watched her from a short distance, his steps silent on the marble as he approached. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle her, though he sensed that the storm itself had already taken that role. Alana lifted her gaze to the ceiling again, her lashes fluttering as she studied the flickering bulbs. Her voice was barely a whisper, softer than the patter of rain against the tall windows. She said, "Please, just hold a little longer," as though she believed she could reason with the electricity. But the storm had its own intentions. A flash lit the hallway in a sudden silver pulse. The brief brightness revealed the faint sheen of tears gathering in Alana's eyes, though she blinked quickly to hide them. When darkness swept back in, her shoulders curled just a fraction, a quiet surrender to a fear she could not quite outrun. She pressed a hand lightly against the wall, fingers splayed against the cold surface, grounding herself with the solid texture. Her other hand came up to her collarbone again, that same gentle hold she used whenever she tried to steady her breathing. Sebastian stepped closer. The air shifted, and that was when she finally noticed him. She straightened immediately, smoothing her apron with quick, embarrassed motions, as though rearranging fabric could erase what he had just seen. "I apologize, sir," she said softly, but her voice shook in a way she tried to disguise. "The lights just startled me." Sebastian studied her in the unsteady glow. Her attempt at composure was admirable, almost practiced, but her trembling fingertips betrayed her. He did not respond right away. Silence, to him, was often sharper than words, and in that silence he saw her brace herself, as if waiting for judgment. Another distant rumble rolled through the valley. Not loud, but enough to ripple across the glass panes. Alana's eyes flicked instinctively toward the sound before she forced them back to him. "I am fine," she added quickly, too quickly, her chin dipping in a small nod meant to end the moment. But Sebastian remained still, his expression unreadable. What he saw was not inconvenience. It was not weakness. It was a woman standing in the crosswinds of past and present, trying to hold herself together in a mansion that felt far too large during storms like this. The lights flickered again, this time dimming for several seconds. The hum of electricity thinned to a faint thread. Alana's breath hitched sharply, her body leaning subtly toward the nearest support, as though preparing for the dark to swallow the hall at any moment. Sebastian's gaze followed the small motion, the way her hand lifted an inch before she forced it back down, refusing to reveal just how deeply the storm rattled her. Outside, the thunder gathered strength again. Inside, the house seemed to wait with her, holding on to the last flickers of light as the night pressed in. The lights strained once more, flickering in a thin glow that made the entire hallway appear suspended between brightness and shadow. Alana stood beneath the chandelier, trying to hold herself still, but the faint tremor in her hands betrayed the calm expression she attempted to wear. The storm outside thickened, rolling across the valley in slow, heavy waves that made the windows pulse with each distant rumble. Sebastian remained only a few steps away now, watching her with a focus sharper than he had intended. He had seen many storms pass over this estate, but none had ever revealed so much about a person as this one did about her. When the lights dimmed lower, Alana's breath tightened again. Her eyes flicked upward, tracking the glow as if she could keep it alive through sheer will. "It will be fine," she murmured to herself, though the words sounded like a memory of something once comforting rather than something she believed in this moment. Another rumble pressed against the mansion, the kind that rode the wind slowly rather than striking suddenly. Yet even this gentler sound made her shoulders tense. She tilted her head slightly downward, not wanting anyone to see her reaction, not realizing that Sebastian already had. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, His voice was calm, steady, a grounded presence in the wavering light. She turned quickly, forcing a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Yes, sir. I was just finishing here." Sebastian studied the strain in her smile, the way she clutched the duster more tightly than necessary, the way her posture held a subtle but unmistakable brace. He did not comment on any of it. Instead, he nodded, his tone even. The storm seemed stronger than expected. Alana looked away for half a second, just long enough for worry to flicker through her expression before she smoothed it back into silence. "I grew up around storms," she said softly. "I should not be startled by them at my age." But even as she spoke, the lights overhead gave another faint flicker, and her breath caught in her chest. Sebastian noticed the tiny gasp she tried to hide, the way she pressed her thumb against her palm as if grounding herself through touch. A soft tapping sound drifted through the hall as the wind pushed raindrops against the windows in uneven rhythms. Alana stared at the pattern, almost transfixed, as memories layered behind her eyes. Her heartbeat echoed faintly in the quiet. Sebastian took another step forward, slow enough that she had room to retreat if she needed to. But she did not move away. She simply stood there, trying to steady her breath, unaware that the storm outside was gradually pulling her inner world into view. For a moment, there was no rumble, no flicker, no flash. Just a stretched, fragile quiet. Then a brighter pulse lit the hallway without warning. The chandelier dimmed sharply. The hum of electricity thinned to a whisper. Alana inhaled shakily, her composure cracking just enough for him to see the truth she had been holding together since the first thunderclap. The storm was circling closer, and the house, like her breath, was running out of steadiness to hold back the dark. The faint hum of electricity stretched thinner with every second, like a thread pulled too tight. Alana stood beneath the trembling glow of the chandelier, her breath shallow as the storm pressed against the mansion with renewed force. A sudden pulse of light flashed through the windows, illuminating the hallway in a silver wash before plunging it back into its dim amber haze. Sebastian watched her carefully, the tension in her posture drawing his attention more sharply than the storm itself. She held the duster close to her side, gripping it as though the familiar texture might anchor her through the next wave of thunder. Her eyes drifted toward the tall windows again, not to observe the weather but to anticipate it, as if preparing for the moment the world might go dark. Another low rumble rolled across the valley, followed by the faint shake of the floor beneath them. Alana startled, only slightly, but it was enough to break the fragile stillness. She attempted to disguise it with a small breath and a quiet straightening of her shoulders. "It catches me off guard sometimes," she whispered, perhaps more to herself than to him. Sebastian did not respond immediately. He watched the way she tried to rebuild her composure piece by piece, the way her fingertips brushed against the wall again for grounding. There was a gentleness in her struggle, a vulnerability he had not expected to see in someone who moved through the mansion with such quiet discipline. The chandelier flickered a final time, dimming so low that the crystals barely caught any light at all. Alana's eyes widened just a fraction as she tilted her head upward, waiting, listening. The hum of the lights sputtered. A hesitation. A warning. Then, without ceremony, the entire hallway surrendered to darkness. The glow vanished. The house fell silent. The rain outside became the only sound, tapping in rapid rhythms against the windows as the storm finally claimed the estate. For a moment, the darkness was absolute. Alana inhaled sharply, a quiet, trembling sound she could not contain. Her hand rose instinctively, reaching for something familiar in a space that had become suddenly unfamiliar. Sebastian stepped forward before he fully realized he had moved. His voice cut through the dark, steady and low, shaped not by command but by reassurance. "Do not move, Ms. Brooks. I am right here." The darkness seemed to shift around his words, no longer as heavy, no longer as consuming. Alana froze, listening, her breath uneven. The faint outline of her figure appeared as his eyes adjusted, and he saw her standing near the wall, one hand pressed against it, the other hovering slightly in the air, as if she had been reaching for something she was afraid to touch. "The power will come back," she whispered, though her voice carried little certainty. "It always does." Sebastian took another measured step, making sure she could hear him rather than see him, easing the space around her with the sound of his presence. "You are not alone in this," he said quietly. The house groaned under the weight of the wind. The darkness settled deeper. Yet in that stillness, something shifted, not in the storm, not in the mansion, but in the fragile space between them. The darkness settled thickly through the hallway, a slow and heavy veil that erased every familiar line of the mansion. For a moment, neither Sebastian nor Alana moved, as though the house itself had paused with them. The only sound was the steady rhythm of rain striking the tall windows, each drop a soft reminder of the storm pressing closer around them. Alana's breathing trembled in the dark, not loud, but uneven enough that Sebastian could hear the fragile edges of it. She kept one hand on the wall, her fingers lightly curled against the cool surface, tracing the outline of a carved panel she could not see but knew was there. The other hand hovered uncertainly near her chest, as though she wanted to clasp it for steadiness, but refused to show that vulnerability even now. Sebastian spoke again, his voice low and controlled, not sharp, not commanding, simply present. "It is only a blackout. The generators will activate shortly." The reassurance was logical, steady, but he knew it was not the logic she needed. In the darkness, his eyes adjusted, revealing the faint outline of her silhouette. She turned her head slightly toward the sound of his voice. "I know," she whispered. "I just do not like the dark during storms." Her words trembled at the edges, as though each syllable carried a memory she was trying not to revisit. The wind surged against the side of the mansion, and another low rumble vibrated through the structure. Alana inhaled sharply and took half a step back, bumping lightly into the wood trim behind her. The quiet contact sent her shoulders upward in a tense reflex. Sebastian moved closer, slow enough not to startle her, the soft sound of his shoes brushing the floor announcing his presence. He stopped at a distance that offered both security and space. "You do not have to pretend you are fine," he said. His tone was not critical. It was steady, even, shaped by something gentler than concern but firmer than sympathy. Alana swallowed, the sound faint in the dark. She allowed her hand to rest fully against the wall, grounding herself in the only anchor she had. "I have been afraid of storms since I was a child," she said quietly. "Back home, the power went out often, and the sound of thunder always came too close. I learned to stay still until the lights came back. It became a habit." Sebastian listened, his expression hidden in the shadows, but his presence felt closer, warmer than the cold air drifting through the hallway. "Habits can come from difficult places," he murmured. "It does not make them any less real." She let out a trembling breath, surprised by the understanding in his voice. Another flicker of lightning flashed through the distant windows, bright enough to paint their outlines in pale blue for a heartbeat. In that brief glow, Sebastian saw the tightness in her jaw, the shimmer of unshed fear in her eyes, the strength it took for her to keep herself upright. Then the darkness returned, deeper and quieter than before. "Thank you," she whispered, though she was not entirely sure what she was thanking him for. Perhaps for not looking away. Perhaps for standing close without overwhelming her. Perhaps simply for speaking into a dark she had learned to face alone. Sebastian remained near her, still and steady, as the storm gathered once more outside, preparing its next trial against the old mansion and the people within it. The storm pressed harder against the mansion, wrapping the structure in a darkness that felt almost tangible, a slow and steady weight settling into every corner of the hall. Alana stood with one hand braced against the wall, her breath shallow but gradually lengthening as she leaned into the quiet of Sebastian's presence. The blackout had taken the world from her eyes, but his voice had given her a shape to focus on, a point in the dark that did not shift with the storm. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped in quick, uneven rhythms against the tall windows, and the wind hummed low beneath the eaves. In the silence, Sebastian could hear the faint tremor in Alana's breathing beginning to smooth into a calmer pattern. He waited, steady and patient, letting her gather herself at her own pace. When she finally spoke, her voice came softly, as if she feared the darkness might amplify her words. "When I was younger, the storms always seemed louder than they should have been," she whispered. "Maybe they were not. Maybe it is just how memories shape things." Sebastian listened, the space between them shaped entirely by her quiet confession. "Where I grew up," she continued, The power lines were old. Whenever the thunder rolled in, everything went dark. My family would light candles, but I always felt the shadows move too much, like the house could not hold them still. She drew a slow breath, steadying her voice. I learned to stay in one place until the lights returned. I felt safer that way, even if it did not make sense. Sebastian absorbed her words with a stillness that did not feel cold. He understood more than she realized. Darkness had its own way of shaping people, of tracing old wounds even when nothing touched them. There is nothing unreasonable about wanting stability, he said. Most people pretend they do not need it, but everyone does. Alana let out a soft exhale, almost a quiet laugh, though it carried no amusement. I am not used to talking during storms, she admitted. I usually wait them out alone. A brief flash of distant lightning lit the windows in a pale streak. Not enough to illuminate the hall fully, but enough for Sebastian to catch a glimpse of her profile, the delicate tension in her jaw easing just a little. When the darkness returned, it felt less consuming. You do not have to wait this one out alone, he said. The words came simply, without ceremony, but they settled between them like a small anchor dropped into shifting water. Alana did not respond right away. She stood quietly, her breath growing steadier as the storm continued to pulse beyond the walls. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Thank you, sir." Another low rumble passed overhead, but she did not flinch. Not this time. Sebastian remained near her, the calm center of a night that refused to be still, and for the first time since the power had gone out, the storm felt less like something closing in and more like something passing by. The storm lingered around the mansion as if reluctant to move on, its rhythm softening but not yet fading. In the darkness, the air felt calmer, smoother, shaped by the quiet between each distant rumble. Alana stood with her hand still resting lightly against the carved wall, her breathing more even now, each inhale steadier than the last. Sebastian remained near her, not imposing, not overbearing, simply present in a way that filled the hallway with a quiet sense of steadiness. For a while, they listened to the subtle shifts of the storm, the softened tap of rain on the wide windows, the low hum of wind curving around the edges of the estate. In that stillness, something delicate settled between them, something unspoken yet unmistakably real. When Alana finally lowered her hand from the wall, it was slow and measured, as though she was testing the air, ensuring the dark no longer held the same sharp edge it once had. "It feels different now," she murmured, her voice gentle, still hushed, but no longer trembling. Not quieter, but less overwhelming. Sebastian glanced toward the tall windows, though he could see little in the blackout. "Storms change," he said, "and sometimes they leave space for us to breathe again." She let out a soft exhale, almost a sigh of release. "I did not expect tonight to be like this," she admitted. "I thought I would spend the storm alone in my quarters, waiting for the lights to return. I usually do." Sebastian listened, noting the faint vulnerability beneath her words. "You handled yourself well." She almost smiled in the dark, a small, shy lift of her voice. It did not feel that way. He waited, letting the silence rest before he spoke again. "Fear does not take away strength, Miss Brooks. Sometimes it reveals it." The words settled over her like a quiet blanket, unexpected and grounding. The next rumble outside was softer, drawn out like a distant echo rather than a threat. Alana did not flinch this time. She simply stood there, allowing the sound to pass through the hall without gripping her breath. Then, almost on cue, a faint hum began somewhere deep in the mansion. A gentle vibration, subtle but unmistakable. The emergency generators, awakening. Light flickered through the hallway, first dim, then brightening into a warm, steady glow that cast soft reflections across the polished floor. Alana blinked against the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting slowly. When she looked toward Sebastian, she found him watching her with the same steady calm he had offered in the dark. The restored light revealed the faint tension that had eased from her posture, the softness returning to her features. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she straightened her apron, smoothing the fabric in a familiar, grounding gesture. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. "I did not expect anyone to." Sebastian gave a small nod, subtle but sincere. No one should face a storm alone. The hallway glowed brighter as the lights fully stabilized, washing away the last shadows left behind by the blackout. Yet the quiet that remained between them did not fade. It simply deepened, settling into something unspoken that neither of them hurried to name. Outside, the storm began to drift, leaving the mansion standing in its renewed light, and leaving the two of them standing closer than the darkness had ever intended.